Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first April session of the UPAC Colloquium, where we have Kian Salimkhani as our speaker. I was going to say from the University of Cologne, but this is his first day at the University of Nijmegen. So we're glad to have him very nearby from now on. Kian is an expert in many things: the non-fundamentality of space-time, dynamical approach, pin-2 gravity, unification. Sure, I'm forgetting 4 or 5 topics. But he works on lots of stuff. We're very much looking forward to all the interesting stuff he's going to do as part of the Radboud Center for Natural Philosophy. But for now, we're looking forward to hear about the non-fundamentality of space-time. Kian, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Niels. Thanks for having me. And a nice introduction, which basically mentioned all the topics I'm talking about today, I guess, or it's most of them. Yeah, thanks for being here. And the main topics of this talk are the following: what is fundamentality, sketching the argument from GR and problems and caveats of that argument that is laid out in more detail in this book that is available since last October or something. Yeah, so I will start by basically talking actually quite a bit about fundamentality from a more metaphysical perspective also, and then really sketch the main argument from basically the spin-2 approach, dynamical spin-2 approach to generativity. And I think I have enough time to mention a few problems and caveats at the end. Yeah. Okay, let's start. Yeah, so what is fundamentality? Those are many related notions. Just for a brief look. When we talk about fundamentality in physics, we can apply this notion to entities, equations, and theories alike. And then we often find that in physics, we use the notion primitive. So we don't often find it analyzed. If it is analyzed to some extent, it means something with regard to these 3 points, maybe generality. So the fundamental equation or theory is the most general, the most conclusive, accurate description, and it kind of points at unification. And that notion of fundamentality in terms of generality is used, for example, by Ward and also, we can think of fundamentality in physics in terms of composition. Then the fundamental entities are uncomposed entities, as Thomson writes, and they are elementary structureless or simple and boring, as Weinberg writes. And then we also can sometimes find this priority understanding of fundamentality. That means that the fundamental is that what features at the Planck scale, and that is first to some extent in terms of the cooling history of the universe. So those are notions of fundamentality that we find in physics and textbooks, basically.
What do you mean by first? Not chronological.
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's a very literal reading of it's first in terms of it's within the cooling history of the universe. The high energy stuff is kind of first. It happens, and then the universe cools down, and electrons and what have you rise.
So I assumed ontological priority fell under 3, but if you said does it? Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Completely fine. If you have questions, ask them. This is really fundamentality in physics as we find it in textbooks, and they don't talk about ontological priority usually, at least. But we will come to that in a moment. Yeah. So then we have fundamentality in philosophy of physics, where it's surprisingly, and unlike emergence, for example, hardly analyzed at all. There are exceptions, of course. Kerry Mackenzie does lots of work on this. So we have usually this primitive notion that is informed by physics, some kind of minimal meaning in terms of these kind of 3 options you have. Hagel and Utrecht, for example, which I consider a seminal paper in space-time philosophy, doesn't define what fundamental means, but talks a bit about they talk a bit about emergence. Crowther, for example, Karen Crowther says she's not sure what we should take fundamental to mean, and then continues to avoid the term and instead talks about relative energy scales, micro-microton, and so on. So for some reason, either you think you already know what it means, or you kind of try to avoid it in philosophy of physics. But there are also philosophers of physics who explicate what they mean with fundamentality. And then we find, for example, that the fundamentals are defined in the kinematically possible models of a theory, which is due to James Reed, or they feature in almost all models of a theory or almost all solutions to some relevant equation. Or you can even find this very similar notion of self-standing or autonomy or ontological independence, actually, that we will talk about in a moment when it comes to metaphysics. So sometimes you find these explications, but then it's not really discussed further. Yes, please.
So autonomy, I find surprising because typically that's the word that comes up when people talk about emergence, right?
Yeah. But still, it's kind of emergence and autonomy is kind of if you have some higher level stuff that is still autonomous, although it's at the higher level. Right? So, but yeah, you can mix this up, of course. There is also a notion of concept of emergence that tries to work with autonomy in terms of well, I know I don't think I have a slide on this, but we can talk about the kind of relation between emergence and fundamentality.
About one, yes. What are these fundamentals? Are these physical magnitudes or what?
The fundamental entities of some model could be a metric field, for example, in the space-time philosophy. Yes. So in metaphysics, there we have the ontological reading fundamentals. The fundamental entities are ontologically privileged to some so in some sense, and we have now to define, of course, what that sense is. And the interesting thing is that the question whether some entity is fundamental is not just a question about whether it's real or not. It's not a question about whether it's on the list of what there is, but it is a question about the ontological relations with respect to ultimately all the other entities, as we will see them. So it's one could say, I would say, I think this in a moment. So let me just continue. So in this sense, then fundamentality is an ontological priority relation, and it's connected to explanation. And there is a typical methodological assumption that comes with it here, namely that explanatory priority implies ontological. In terms of truth making, it's arguably the other way around. So the ontological priority explains why there is an explanatory. So it makes true why there is. And if you now want to again ask, what does fundamentality mean? What is the fundamental? Then a tentative explication is often given in terms of the unexplained explainer. Or Karen Bennett says building relations under builder. And this kind of hints at the issue that you have two conceptions here. One is upward directed. It builds, it explains something, the fundamental. And one is downward directed. It is unbuilt or it is not explained. And Leuenberger calls this then also the ungrounded and the all-grounding representation. So unbuilt is ungrounded, all-grounding is building. So the two conceptions are first, the absolutely fundamental entities are unexplained. They are ungrounded. They are ontologically independent. That's ontological independence is one of the main conceptions of what fundamentality means. The second main conception is that the absolutely fundamental entities are in the set of entities that explain everything. So the fundamentals are part of what grounds or what determines everything, and that's the determination notion of fundamentality, or also completeness notion of fundamentality, because it is about the set that really is complete and minimal and explains everything else. I guess I will use the term determination from now on. Yeah, so first notion, fundamentality as independence. The fundamental entities are the ontologically independent entities. This is the ungrounded conception in terms of Leuenberger. And there is a typical methodology connected to this, and that is in terms of reduction, basically. So ontological reducibility implies that there is an ontological dependence. So there is non-fundamentality. So something is non-fundamental if that is possible, if you can ontologically reduce it. And for the second, the determination or completeness notion of fundamentality, you have a different methodology, basically. You have what we usually call indispensability arguments. So you argue that something is indispensable for explaining everything else, and therefore it is in the set of the fundamental entities. And that's also the all-grounding conception. Here's a quote that explains this in terms of the famous God metaphor. So the determination notion, but also the independence notion. But this fits better to the determination notion, basically. So the fundamental entities are all and only those entities which God needs to create in order to make the world how it is. That's basically the idea behind this. And then you can ask, how are these two conceptions related? And this is non-trivial. Often we have this implicit assumption that they should pick out the same fundamentals, but this is not like from a point of view of analyzing the concepts for themselves. It's not clear that this is the case. I will not use everything here, but the important thing here might be that so you have cases where the notions can come apart. So, for example, Bennett discusses this building circle world. So you have minimal complete set that determine, but the entities are all dependent on each other. So you have this building circle. The world consists of entities that build each other all the way around. So you have dependence, but this is complete. Yeah.
With the God metaphor, can it matter in which order God creates everything?
Good question.
Like if you're dualistic of entire religion, like matter is fundamental space-time, but surely God needs to create a container before you can add the container.
That's a good question. I guess so. From this point of view now, in terms of what is fundamental, you would then say, usually you would say it doesn't matter, because if you have to create it, then this is part of the fundamental stuff. But here's also Barnes, Elizabeth Barnes works on this actually, that you have symmetric dependence relations, and also I will come to that in a moment. But you have a notion of emergence that kind of fits nicely in this scheme, because then you have the emergent stuff is dependent to some extent, but it's still fundamental because you have to add it explicitly. So this is kind of maybe in that direction. What I just I think didn't mention explicitly in talking is that this explanation stuff here means that you have a directionality and asymmetry that is essential for that you call something fundamental. I will come to this in a moment, so I just remember that, and I should say that before. So the question again is, what is the relation between the two conceptions? It's not trivial. I will not talk about this in any further today, I guess, but there are examples, there are proposals how to deal with this. For example, you could use certain principles that explicitly connect the two. For example, Karen Bennett uses the principle that the determination conception fundamentals, those that are in the complete minimal set that determine everything else, they are in this set because they are independent, not because they do the determination. So that's a principle that would connect the two notions, and then they would pick out, at least for under the assumption of this of such principles, they can pick out the same fundamentals. Other option would be, obviously, you just find a way to argue that at least in physically sensible worlds, we will always have the same fundamentals with respect to both notions.
Yeah. Could it be something that exists on its own, but there's just nothing else in the world that depends on it? Right? Maybe you think the cosmological constant doesn't depend on anything. It's fundamental, but it can't really extract the energy from it. It's
Okay, so I mentioned that already, that there is, I think, interesting observation to have that the two conceptions involve different methodologies. Fundamentality is independence. We use reduction, and that means basically we do not accept primitivity. We try to reduce anyway. We do not accept that something's primitive. We try to find a reductive explanation, and then that entails that you're looking for fundamentality in terms of independence, because you're looking for the independent entities and not for the determination entities. And fundamentality as determination uses the methodology of indispensability argument. So you argue that something is indispensable to explain everything in the world, or at least something of this. And you basically refuse to give a reductive account there. So an example would be when he's arguing in favor of fundamental time direction, because he basically argues in terms of this direction is indispensable for our explanations that we want to give in physics, and refuses to give a reductive account of that. Now, something else I just want to mention briefly, and so this is basically all also part of the UG project on fundamentality in physics and metaphysics, and this is one of the sub-projects of this. That's the issue of redundancy and inconsistency. So if you assume you have that reductive explanation is feasible, you can have a reductive explanation. If you would, for example, not find this reductive explanation for some reason, and you posit a primitive entity as allegedly fundamental, but actually you have a reductive explanation, then this obviously introduces a redundancy. You could have done without it, but it might even introduce an inconsistency, because fundamentality as ontological independence implies a sense in which the fundamentals cannot be inconsistent, because they should be freely modally recombinable. So you should always be able, if they are really truly ontologically independent, you should always be able to add or take away one of those. The world would certainly look different then, but it shouldn't affect the other fundamentals.
But then the dualistics of the tablet has a problem if they want to keep the matter in the middle of the space.
Yeah, there might be cases that don't work with this. Yes, and I'm also I'm not claiming this. I'm just mentioning that this is typically assumed. So that's one issue, and then you can turn this around and basically argue, if you find a theoretical inconsistency, then you can interpret this as there being some unresolved tension within the fundamental posits, if the other thing was true. So in other words, these hidden dependence relations among allegedly independent posits can show up as two inconsistencies. For example, if you posit quantum matter fields, Heisenberg uncertainty principle, gravity, and fundamental continuous metric field, then you might run into problems. Yeah. Okay, so, and I will now try to use this kind of background and apply it to this issue of space-time, fundamentality of space-time. And the question is space-time fundamental? That means, is it ontologically independent? I will use that notion, that concept. Now, further remarks, side remarks. Usually we talked about the reality of space-time. That's the traditional question. Is space-time part of the ontology of our world? But I think, and I think many agree that the modern question is more like, does space-time enjoy this ontological priority? Is it fundamental? Certainly exists in some way. I'm happy to grant that, but is it really a fundamental? Then we have, I think that this is the better framing, because we have these three advantages then. First of all, we understand better the input of new physical theories, because new physical theories do not just update our knowledge about what exists, but they update the knowledge about what are the dependence relations between the stuff that exists. And also, if we look for dependence relations specifically, then we kind of are not so much in danger of accepting like these formalistic or literal theory interpretations. So just because something is written in the fundamental formula doesn't necessarily mean that this is really a fundamental entity, because there might be hidden dependence relations that you can uncover afterwards. What I will discuss in a moment is an example of this. And yeah, in the space-time case specifically, we have that these two larger separate debates about relativity theory kind of converge. I think fruitfully. Some may disagree, I guess, but yeah, I hope that works out. Another side remark: I shouldn't say space-time fundamentality because space-time can mean various things. For example, it could be the manifold and the metric field. Here in this talk, I will focus on metric structure specifically. I guess I don't have to go through this, what metric structure is. So the claim will be not space-time fundamentalism, but space-time metric fundamentalism is specifically. And that claim is the metric field is fundamental. That means it is ontologically independent. That's the claim I am trying to attack in this talk now. So that is the claim of the space-time metric fundamentalist. I am not a space-time metric fundamentalist. Okay. So if you think that the space-time metric is fundamental, then Brown and Pooley have pointed out the following problem, the coincidence problem, say. And that is, as a matter of logic alone, if one postulates space-time structure as a self-standing autonomous element in one's theory, I would suggest to read that as ontologically independent element in one's theory. It need have no constraining role on the form of the laws governing the rest of the theory's models. Basically, Harvey Brown asks, what explains what here? What is geometry doing? Codifying the behavior of free bodies in elegant mathematical language, or actually explaining it? And he thinks that it is a spurious notion of explanation that is being offered here. Here's another quote: at the heart of the whole business is the question whether the space-time explanation of inertia is not just an exercise in redundancy. It is non-trivial, of course, that inertia can be given a geometrical description, but what is at issue is the error of explanation. The notion of explanation that Nerlich, who I didn't give a quote earlier, offers is like introducing two cogs into a machine which only engage with each other. It is simply more natural and economical, better philosophy in short, to consider absolute spacetime structure as a codification of certain key aspects of the behavior of particles and of fields. So the key thing is that Brown thinks that taking the spacetime metric as fundamental means to introduce a redundancy. And keep in mind that might mean later on to actually introduce an inconsistency. And it is an issue of the error of explanations. So yeah, fits nicely into this framework of fundamentality. I think I also skipped that. Yeah, so what are the central claims of the spacetime metric fundamentalist? First, the metric field is fundamental, ontologically independent. And second, there's also a chronogeometric requirement, namely material rods and clocks built from matter fields survey the metric field because the symmetry properties of the matter field dynamics coincide with the symmetry properties of the metric field. And now the critics can say, well, either you don't really have an explanation for this coincidence, it's really a coincidence, or it is an implausible explanation because we do not accept that the metric determines matter field properties, basically, or there is some extrinsic thing going on here with respect to the chronogeometric requirement. The coincidence is in virtue of something else, or specifically the symmetry properties of the metric field are as they are in virtue of something else. For example, the laws or equations of motion. So that is basically the criticism also of the dynamical approach, that is an extrinsic thing. Yeah, and the central claims of the dynamical approach are that chronogeometricity is not a property that geometrical structures have intrinsically. Extrinsically, they have it. So they don't have it in virtue of themselves, but in virtue of the dynamics of matter fields. And the second main claim of the dynamical approach is that fixed background structures such as the Minkowski metric in special relativity are ontologically reducible to the dynamical symmetry properties of the matter fields that constitute physical particles.
Why do they have to be fixed?
Because it only works that way. Read the book.
No,
you know it, of course. No, but so right. There are also claims involving GR that don't work with a fixed background structure. Usually, you have the G field that is a dynamical player. But so this is the condensed version of the central claims of the dynamic approach. Basically, the second claim is about special relativity, and the first claim is also about special relativity, but more importantly about general relativity. Because in general relativity, you work with a G field that is not fixed, and then you cannot apply the second claim. You only say that chronogeometricity is in virtue of something else, namely the dynamics of matter fields. But in this talk, I will, of course, argue that you can actually have this for GR as well, but that's for next. So chronogeometricity, again, is the property of a field to act as the metric that is surveyed by the material rods and clocks. So the dynamical approach basically points out a dependence relation. Namely, metric fields depend partly or fully on the matter field content or the matter field dynamics. In the partly case is the general relativity case. The G field depends partly on the matter field content in so far as its chronogeometricity depends. And in special relativity, we find a case of full dependence. The Minkowski metric eta is fully reducible and therefore non-fundamental. You can just, Brown would just treat it as a redundancy and just work with the Lorentzian symmetry properties of the matrix. But there is another sense in which G is dependent, I claim, and that is due to the spin 2 theory. That's basically the spin 2 theory. So G is eta plus H. G is the metric field of GR, eta is the Minkowski metric, and H is a new matter field that is basically the graviton field. And important is H is really the full deviation. So that is actually an equation that holds. It's not any approximations. And G is dynamical and generally curved, and eta is fixed and flat. And those are empirically equivalent views, basically, of the metric.
Sorry, so we say it's an equation that holds. Is it like a dynamical equation or more like beyond identity? Like
it's an identity, yeah. It's an identity. Yeah. So we can interpret this identity. We can interpret this identity as an ontological reduction. In the following sense, the entities at one level are nothing more than the entities than a manifestation of entities at a lower level. So G is nothing more than eta plus H. And then if you accept that ontological reduction reading here, then G equals eta plus H is kind of a bridge law, really in this very traditional sense. And in terms of dependence, you can say that G depends on eta and H. It's pretty simple. Now,
so it's a bridge between what and what?
So basically, that's if you accept that GR as a theory can be reduced to spin 2 theory, then G equals eta plus H is the bridge law that fixes that reduction. Now, even the spacetime metric fundamentalist can accept G as actually non-fundamental entity. So even the spacetime fundamentalist can just say, well, eta, that's the fundamental spacetime metric. But G isn't. And then you have basically different ontologies. You have standard interpretation where G is fundamental, and you have the spin 2 interpretation where G is non-fundamental, because it fully depends on the fundamental entities eta and H. Yes.
Sorry, but H also because there are metric here in this case.
It's not a metric because it is.
But it has to be. It's not considered to be small. Otherwise, T will not be a metric because you could invent any kind of H.
Yeah, but H doesn't. You see. No, but so H doesn't have signature, for example. It just lacks basic properties that
make to imply some properties, right? Because otherwise.
No, that's true. That's certainly true. You cannot just. I mean, I will come to that in a moment, actually. But you cannot just use any field. That's true. What you can do is use almost any field, but then you have to change eta as well. Yeah. But I will come to that in a moment. Yeah.
Is that the reason you call it a matter field? Because
yes.
It's not a metric field.
Yeah.
Because it's not metric, it must be matter.
Yeah, in a sense, yes. So I'm assuming the dichotomy. Yeah. In the book, I have a short part on why you can consider it a matter field. It basically is because if like gluon fields or photon fields are matter fields, then this should also be. Yeah. So I did say that you have the standard interpretation, G is fundamental, and you have the spin 2 interpretation, G is non-fundamental. However, there is a problem with this interpretation. Because the bridge law is an identity, you don't have the asymmetry that you need to make actually the fundamentality claim. So you have a symmetric dependence relation, and there is no way to immediately infer that one or the other is fundamental or not. Basically, you can just write down. You could take the identity and just say that H depends on G and eta or what have you. So symmetric dependence relation doesn't give you the asymmetry you need for fundamentality claims.
To make a dynamical argument that in all the equations of motion, everything that matters, it's only ever a combination of eta and H, so G that appears, or deviate from your two concepts.
I think you can have several arguments, yes, and that would be, I guess, one of them. But the point here is now just you should. I mean, often in philosophy of physics, I have the feeling we do this. We see an equation and we say, well, that's fundamental, and that's building it up, so that must be non-fundamental. That must be fundamental, and the other thing is not fundamental. I'm just in this very easy case, just urging us to not be that naive, basically.
You need to say a little bit more about this. So the standard example of a bridge law, the temperature is mean kinetic energy. That's also an identity.
Yes.
Why is that then asymmetric and this is symmetric?
It is not.
Oh, it is not.
Yeah.
That's the point.
So it's some people would take what I just said and basically argue that any kind of reduction is affected by this. And I kind of agree for now, but I think that you can usually, in this case and also in the temperature case, give reasons why you, so additional reasons why you should accept one as the fundamental and the other as the non-fundamental. But you could have the stance that it's just two perspectives and you cannot really decide. So what I will propose to actually resolve this issue is to combine the two critiques of the standard view. And here are the respective problems for the inferences to non-fundamentality again. So for the dynamic view approach, the dependence relation only helps for fixed fields and chronogeometricity in the case of G. And in the spin 2 case, the dependence relation is symmetric. These are the two issues that kind of prevent us from arguing that G is non-fundamental.
And I go on a little bit about this. So, I mean, so we have the bridge laws, but we also have the requirements that one theory should, in combination with the bridge law, be deducible from the other. So that is an one-way thing.
It works in both ways in that case.
In this case, it works in both. Okay, so that you need to add that. Thank you.
So now let's revisit the spin 2 theory. There is a sense in which this spin 2 view separates what is mixed in the G field of G, namely a fixed space-time metric part and a dynamical gravitation part. And obviously, so that would be one condition. This is possible because gravity is universal. So you can think of the Poincare case that is only possible because gravity is universal interaction. That's why you can write this into the metric. In other words, there is a sense in which, in terms of dependence and independence, there is a dependent and there is an independent part, and those two structures are separable in spin 2. The eta is the dependent part, and the H is the independent. So that's a new proposal. Combine the two views, the dynamical approach view and the spin 2 view of GR, to a dynamical spin 2 view. Then H is a new ontologically independent matter field, and eta ontologically depends on the symmetry properties of the matter fields, including H as well. because H also has Lorentzian symmetry. Hence, on a dynamical view, the dependence relation G equals eta plus H cannot be interpreted as a simple part-whole relation anymore, because the eta and the H are not independent of each other. Eta depends on symmetry properties. So this already suggests this non-literal reading of symmetry. And as I think, as I argue in more detail in the book, this then this combining those two views paves the way for this inference to non-fundamentality of the G field. Okay, so that was basically the sketch of the argument. Now, if I have 5 minutes,
You interrupt
Yeah.
yourself and say
Yeah.
all the time.
So further problems and caveats. So we could arguably use additional support for this claim that the G field is not fundamental. But it is, for now, a very, I think, very important, very interesting feature of GR alone, that it allows for a non-fundamental reading of its metric field. Just where the skeptic, you would, however, probably not have enough from just GR, because in the book I kind of take these two examples, explanatory coherence and quantitative and qualitative parsimony. I think that it is kind of, this discussion is still in favor of this dynamical spin 2 view, but arguably the skeptic would say that, well, this is still too much on a par. But the important thing now is that fundamentality as independence is always implicitly about this, about the dependence relation to everything else, so to all other entities, and yet then you have this unificatory perspective. So you should take the broader context of physics into account and could use continuity conditions from other parts of physics. And then you could, for example, use quantum mechanics and the Heisenberg uncertainty relation and have additional support for that our best understanding of the broader context of physics is that it would be favorable to have a non-fundamental reading of the metric field. But yeah, I will not go into more detail on this. Now, for the, I guess, more severe problems. So there is a qualification for the spin 2 view, and that is basically that it doesn't give you full GR. It gives, in a very specific sense, only part of the solution space of GR. And so in this sense, spin 2 theory and GR are not strictly equivalent, but of course you can argue that the important solutions are there, and that's enough, because GR gives you so much, you don't need everything, maybe. And even if it turns out that you miss one or two important solutions to GR in spin 2 theory, you can still argue that for the solutions that you have in spin 2 theory, that still holds. And if our world happens to be like that, then that would still work out. And just to mention, so it's about globally hyperbolic solutions, basically. Now, there is another problem, also Linnemann's Mencken-Baker think, and they put their view in terms of this nice dilemma here. So the central philosophical claim of this paper is either the view of the metric field as a mere stand-in for a self-coupling spin 2 field in flat spacetime is physically incomplete, insofar as it requires recourse to GR after all. That's the first horn. Or it leads to an absurd multiplication of alternative viewpoints on GR. That's the second. Let me take the two horns in turn. So that's the reply to the first one. I think, so the first one was, if you have this spin 2 view then you need to you need the recourse to GR anyways. And that is basically because the energy momentum tensor needs to be restricted for writing down the spin-2 theory. And you would restrict that in a way that you end up with GR, of course. So you kind of look into what do I need for GR to turn out the right theory. So I choose my energy momentum. And it's a nice thought, but I'm honestly not sure whether that works out, because I'm thinking basically, is that too strict with respect to what is allowed, what is permissible in such derivations? What kind of recourse to GR is actually problematic? Couldn't you just say this is a shortcut to empirical adequacy, basically? I know this, that GR should come out in this way. So I know that there is this restriction to respect to the energy momentum tensors. So why would I want to use something else? Why not just use this like shortcut to empirical adequacy? So I think that facing the problem that there are many available energy momentum tensors to choose from is not really such a big problem. But you could just say the derivation is less impressive. But that happens quite often in physics, I guess. But yeah, there might be other problems, of course. I don't. So they haven't, that's their example. So I don't know whether they would think that there are still other problems. But if you, for example, I would think it is a severe problem if you cannot even express certain concepts that you need in your spin-2 theory. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So I think I can deal with the first horn, basically. That's what I'm saying. Replying to the second horn. So the second horn was, again, that you have this absurd multiplicity of multiplication of alternative viewpoints, and that's coming to your point, Antonio. You could split this basically in many different ways, and you have this not only the underdetermination between G and eta plus H, but you have also this underdetermination that you could just split G very differently. And the proposal to deal with this is that you use best systematization, because if you choose the best systematization of this split, then you will end up with eta and H, as I told before, because that gives you the higher explanatory power and the better passing. Because then the symmetry properties of H and eta and G all fit. But of course, in physics, this is quite important, because that essentially that you can model curved background fields, and you obviously you use that. So I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't use it. It's just from the metaphysical perspective, it might still be there might still be a way to pick this G equals eta plus H as the preferred split via best systematization. But again, the ontological import will arguably again need, or it would be improved by the further import from a broader perspective, the quantum perspective, basically. Okay, so to conclude, according to a dynamical spin-2 view, GR supports space-time metric non-fundamentalism. The direction of dependence relations cannot be read off the equations, I think. So eta is just a placeholder, basically. You shouldn't interpret that literally. And determining the fundamentals, therefore, requires actual philosophical work and interpretation. And if you have these literal formalists, or whatever you may call it, interpretations, then you may paint over these hidden implicit dependence relations, which then leads to redundancies, or even worse, to inconsistencies. So generally, engaging with the metaphysical literature more closely is helpful for philosophy of physics. I think that's the more general conclusion. Thanks.